Menasseh ben Israel. Manoel Dias Soeiro, better known by his Hebrew name Menasseh ben Israel, also, Menasheh ben Yossef ben Yisrael, also known with the Hebrew acronym, MBY, was a Portuguese rabbi, kabbalist, writer, diplomat, printer, and publisher, founder of the first Hebrew printing press in Amsterdam in 1626. Menasseh was born on Madeira Island in 1604, with the name Manoel Dias Soeiro, a year after his parents had left mainland Portugal because of the Inquisition. The family moved to the Netherlands in 1610. The Netherlands was in the middle of a process of religious revolt against Catholic Spanish rule throughout the 80 Years' War. Amsterdam was an important center of Jewish life in Europe at this time. The family's arrival in 1610 was during the 12 Years' Truce mediated by France and England at The Hague. Menasseh rose to eminence not only as a rabbi and an author, but also as a printer. He established the first Hebrew press in Holland. One of his earliest works, L'Conciliator, published in 1632, won immediate reputation. It was an attempt to reconcile apparent discrepancies in various parts of the Hebrew Bible. Among his correspondents were Gerardus Vossius, Hugo Grotius, Antonio Vieira, and Pierre Daniel Huet. In 1638, he decided to settle in Brazil, as he still found it difficult to provide for his wife and family in Amsterdam. He may have visited the Dutch colony's capital of Recife, but did not move there. One of the reasons his financial situation improved in Amsterdam was the arrival of two Portuguese Jewish entrepreneurs, the brothers Abraham and Isaac Pereira. They hired Rabbi Manasseh to direct a small college or academy they had founded in the city. In 1644, Manasseh met Antonio de Montesinos, a Portuguese traveler and Marrano-Sephardic Jew who had been in the New World. Montesinos convinced him of his conclusion that the South America Andes Indians were the descendants of the lost 10 tribes of Israel. This purported discovery gave a new impulse to Manasseh's messianic hopes, as the settlement of Jews throughout the world was supposed to be a sign that the Messiah would come. Filled with this idea, he turned his attention to England, whence the Jews had been expelled since 1290. He worked to get them permission to settle there again and thus hasten the Messiah's coming. With the start of the Commonwealth, the question of the readmission of the Jews had found increased Protestant support, but it was often mooted under the growing desire for religious liberty. In addition, messianic and other mystic hopes were then current in England. His book, The Hope of Israel, was first published in Amsterdam in Hebrew and in Latin in 1650. The book was written in response to a 1648 letter from John Dury inquiring about Montesinos' claims. In addition to reporting Montesinos' accounts of Jews in the Americas, Hope of Israel expressed the hope that the Jews would return to England as a way of hastening the coming of the Messiah. Menasseh also stresses his kinship with Parliament, and explains himself as driven by amity for England rather than financial gain. In 1651 he offered to serve Christina, Queen of Sweden as her agent of Hebrew books. The same year he met Oliver St. John and his envoys on his mission to secure an Anglo-Dutch coalition. The English were impressed by learning and manner, and advised him to formally apply for Jewish readmission to England. In 1651 his book was translated into English and published in London, prefixed with a dedication to the Parliament and the Council of State. His account of descendants of the lost tribes being found in the New World deeply impressed public opinion and stirred up many polemics in English literature. This included a debate between Edward Spencer and Moses Wall, an MP and a scholar respectively, on Ben Israel's millennial claims and the manner in which the Jews would be converted. Wall and Spencer's letters were printed in later editions of the book. Despite their historic misfortunes and movements, Menasseh characterizes the condition of Jewry at the time by saying, Oliver Cromwell was sympathetic to the Jewish cause, partly because of his tolerant leanings but chiefly because he foresaw the importance for English commerce of the participation of the Jewish merchant princes, some of whom had already made their way to London. At this juncture, the English gave Jews full rights in the colony of Suriname, which they had controlled since 1650. There is some debate among historians, particularly Jewish historian Ismar Shorsh, concerning whether or not Menasseh's personal motives for pursuing the readmission of the Jews by England were primarily political or religious. Shorsh argues that the idea of England being a final place for Jews to inhabit in order to bring about the coming of the Messiah was hardly present in hope of Israel, but rather was developed by Menasseh later in order to appeal to English Christians with millenarian beliefs. In 1655, Menasseh arrived in London. During his absence from the Netherlands, the Amsterdam rabbis excommunicated his student, Baruch Spinoza. In London, Menasseh published his humble addresses to the Lord Protector, but its effect was weakened by William Prynne's publication of Short Demurrer. Cromwell summoned the Whitehall Conference in December of the same year. Some of the most notable statesmen, lawyers, and theologians of the day were summoned to this conference to discuss whether the Jews should be readmitted to England. The chief practical result was the declaration of Judges Glynn and Steele that there was no law which forbade the Jews' return to England. Though nothing was done to regularize the position of the Jews, the door was opened to their gradual return. On December 14, 1655, John Evelyn entered in his diary, "Now were the Jews admitted." When Prynne and others attacked the Jews, Menasseh wrote his major work, Vindicii Judaeorum, in response. Menasseh ben Israel stayed in England for 2 years after the Whitehall Conference. During this time he tried to obtain written permission for the resettlement of the Jews in England. Although he failed in this endeavour, during his stay he met with a large number of influential figures of the age, including Cambridge theologian Ralph Cudworth, Henry Oldenburg, Robert Boyle and his sister, Adam Boreal, John Sadler, John Dury and Samuel Hartlib, as well as more marginal prophetic figures such as Ambrose Barnes and Arise Evans. Ben Israel's stay was managed by the millenarian Philo-Semite Baptist clergyman Henry Jesse. In February 1657 Cromwell granted Ben Israel a state pension of £100, but he died before enjoying it, at Middelburg in the Netherlands in the winter of 1657. He was conveying the body of his son Samuel home for burial. His grave is in the Bethheim of Ouderkerk aan de Amstel, and remains intact. Menasseh ben Israel was the author of many works. His major work Nishmat Hayim is a treatise in Hebrew on the Jewish concept of reincarnation of souls, published by his son Samuel 6 years before they both died. Some scholars think that he studied Kabbalah with Abraham Cohen de Herrera, a disciple of Israel Saruk. This would explain his familiarity with the method of Isaac Luria. The Conciliator was, as above, a work written to reconcile the apparent contradictions in numerous passages throughout the Bible. To achieve this aim, Ben Israel utilized an astounding range of sources, primarily the Talmud and the classic Jewish commentaries, but frequently quotes from the early Christian authorities as well as Greek and Latin authors of antiquity. Written in Spanish, in Amsterdam, 1632, it was aimed primarily to strengthen the faith of the Marranos and the veracity of the Tanakh according to Jewish interpretation. It was translated by Elias Haim Lindo and published by Duncan and Malcolm, in 1842, and again in 1972, with footnotes and introductory material by Sefer Herman Press. His other works include. Other works can be found in the Biblioteca Nacional Rio de Janeiro/Brazil, for example. Menasseh's wife, Rachel, was a granddaughter of the Abarbanel. Menasseh had 3 children by her. According to family legend, Menasseh's wife was a descendant of King David, and he was proud of his children's Davidic ancestry. Both of Menasseh's sons predeceased their father. Menasseh's eldest son was Samuel Abarbanel Soeiro, also known as Samuel ben Israel, who worked as a printer and assisted his father with matters in England. He died in 1657. Menasseh's youngest son, Joseph, died at age 20 in 1650, on a disastrous business trip to Poland. Menasseh also had a daughter, Gracia, born 1628, who married Samuel Abarbanel Barboza in 1646, and died in 1690. Moses Jacob Ezekiel, the American sculptor, in his autobiography claimed to be a descendant of Menasseh ben Israel. His claim is unconfirmed. His portrait was engraved by Salem, Italia. Whether a portrait etching by Rembrandt of 1636 represents Menasseh is doubtful, and painted portraits of Menasseh by Rembrandt or by Ferdinand Ball are not known. Roth, Cecil, and A. K. Offenberg. Menasseh ben Israel. Encyclopedia Judaica. Ed. Michael Birnbaum and Fred Skolnick. 2nd ed. Volume 13. Detroit, Macmillan Reference USA, 2007. 454-455 Gale Virtual Reference Library. Web. October 15, 2014.